put into place. And the heavy water production facility and the heavy water reactor at Arak are also above ground. But we know that Iran is building alternative duplicate facilities which will be hardened or deeply buried. Every day that goes on, therefore, the military option becomes less viable because of the risk that you could successfully destroy, let's say, Esfahan and Natanz, but Iran would have alternative capabilities, so you would get all the downside of the attack, but not the upside of breaking the nuclear fuel cycle. That's why I would have attacked 3 years ago.
What do you... What do you advocate today?
The sooner the better. And let me just say, I don't come to that recommendation lightly,
right,
because the risks of an attack on the Iranian program are real, the risks of failure are high, and the consequences could be substantial. But we're down now to two options. One is preemptive military force applied against the program, option one, or option two, Iran gets nuclear weapons. And so the choice that policymakers face is not the choice between the world as it is today versus the world as it would be after a strike on the Iranian program. If that were the choice, it would be easy. But the world as it is today is disappearing. And it's disappearing at a rate that we can't predict confidently. So the real choice is the world as it is after a strike on Iran's nuclear weapons program, or a world where Iran has nuclear weapons. And as between those two choices, both of which are unattractive, the use of force is the less attractive of the two, less unattractive of the two.
If you were in the business of predicting, what do you predict will happen in the next 2 years?
Well, it would be a massive departure from long-standing Israeli policy not to attack the Iranian program.
Can Israel do it alone?
Yes, as of now, based on what we know now.
Should Israel do it alone?
Since we're not going to do it until at least January the 20th, 2013, yes.
Turn to the Arab Spring.
That was a non-political statement.
Yeah, no. Let's turn to the Arab Spring, as it's called. It does not appear to be leading towards democracy. Indeed, for the moment, appears to be leading quite the opposite direction. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood received, 35% of the vote. The Salafis received, 25% of the vote. 27%, 62% of the Egyptians voted for a radical Islamic perspective. The Young Revolutionaries, by the way, which was the party, those who really essentially created the revolution, the Twitter folks and everything, and helped overthrow the government, essentially received 3% of the vote, I read in the paper. I wasn't particularly optimistic based on what others told me from the get-go about what would happen in Egypt. I saw no reason to, although I wanted to be optimistic. Is there any kind of lesson to be learned here?
Well, it's in America's DNA to favor representative government. That was our foundation. It's deeply rooted in our view that governments that are not based on the will of the people are illegitimate. And so it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that that's the kind of government Americans think other people ought to have as well. But it's also the case that simply saying, now we're going to have a democracy, doesn't get you there. It didn't do that in this country. It hasn't done it anywhere else. And if you look at the circumstances in the Middle East, it's not surprising that the Arab Spring has not brought progress toward democracy. John Stuart Mill, to come back to him, wrote a famous essay called On Representative Government, where he listed the conditions for representative government to be successful. And he said the most important point was where he said the people have to be ready to receive it. And if you'll think of the story after the drafting of our Constitution, people say it's apocryphal, but it's a good story. Anyway, Benjamin Franklin is walking outside of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and this woman comes up to him and says, "Well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" And according to the story, he says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And it was certainly in doubt for quite some time whether in fact it would work or it wouldn't work. Europe has had this problem just within the last century, and for a long time, Italy and Germany and Spain flunked the test. Mm-hmm. In Russia today, we may well be seeing a country that's moved out of an authoritarian government into democracy, moving right back out the other side. So it's no knock on Arabs, it's no knock on Muslims, it's no knock on culture in that part of the world. It is a statement of the human condition that the people have to be ready to receive representative government. Democracy is more than just holding elections and counting votes. It is a culture. It is a way of life, and it develops over time.
So Natan Sharansky, who was here, wrote just a couple of years ago, wrote a book called The Case for Democracy, and in it essentially makes the point that we shouldn't just promote democracy for altruistic reasons, but also because it's good for the safety of other democracies. I want to, let me run a theory by you, kind of chutzpahdik to run a theory of international issues in front of the former UN ambassador to the UN. But nevertheless, I was thinking about, is there a lesson to be learned here? Rather than promoting democracy, should we also not be equally strong about promoting liberty?
Well, I think that individual liberty is the central issue and always should be. Democracy is a way of structuring the government. It's not a way of structuring society. I'd like to see government limited enough that you could roll the dice to see who elected officials would be, because it wouldn't make that much difference. Now that's a long way away, obviously, but it's the difference between society on the one hand and the government on the other. And I think Sharansky's point, I've talked to him about this, he's an optimistic man. I mean, given what he went through, you have to be optimistic. And I don't think he misunderstands what we've been talking about of democracy as a culture. It may be more a question of timing. But the fact is that if you say, well, in the end, it's always better to have everybody else under democracy, that is I'll now intrude your territory, that's a kind of religious statement because it's ultimately not susceptible to proof. As Keynes once said, in the long run, we're all dead. In the long run, that may be true about democracy, but in the short run, right now, if you look at what's happening in Egypt,
and in Gaza. Right?
And as a consequence...
democratically elected Hamas.
Right. The strategic stability in the Middle East is declining day by day and increasingly rapidly. So I think the responsibility of the President for us is to protect American interest. And that may mean trading off one moral imperative for another. The imperative of democracy is a strong one. As I said, it's in our DNA. But the imperative of protecting our strategic interest in the short term to safeguard the lives and stability of our own country, I would judge to be a higher priority.
Are we ending up, in some cases, rewarding terrorism? I mean, think of a way to phrase this. What year did the Chinese invade Tibet? The late 40s, something like
50s,
that?
Yeah.
50s, okay. And since then, the Dalai Lama has staged a nonviolent protest against a country which violated every moral and international law in the Chinese in Tibet. and the Chinese still control Tibet. The Palestinians, who could have had a state, 60 years ago, and Dr. Stephen Burke was just here a couple of days ago saying they could have then celebrated their 63rd anniversary, instead chose not to have a state, instead practiced terrorism against Israel, and now there is great talk about creating a Palestinian state. When one could make the point that had they not been terrorists, there wouldn't be such talk. Are we going to end up rewarding terrorism? I'm not saying that I'm in favor or not in favor of a two-state solution. That's not my point. My point is this two-state solution may very much come as a result of terrorism.
Yeah. Well, I think it is coming as a result of terrorism, and I think we've been guilty over decades of not making it clear that that was unacceptable. And we're still making the mistake today. I understand the humanitarian argument why a government like Israel would want to get Gilad Shalit released. But number one, he is a soldier who followed the laws of war. And he was exchanged for hundreds of terrorists. So Israel did two things that were mistakes in that case. One, it engaged in the fallacy of moral equivalence by exchanging terrorist for a soldier.
Right. I hated the term prisoner exchange. It drove me nuts.
And at the same time, it said, here's the price. So if you're inclined to terrorism, now you know what the cost of it is. And that's why we've said, and why the disapproval of the Iran-Contra affair under Reagan was so intense, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And of course we are. And every time we say we want to negotiate with Iran over their nuclear weapons program, we're negotiating with the world's central banker of international terrorism. It's no wonder people don't think the United States has more than the attention span of a fruit fly when we say these things and then instantly contradict ourselves.
So Mr. Ambassador, let me then turn to the United States and ask you a question that is raised frequently. Just get your take. Do you believe in what is often referred to as American exceptionalism, and how do you define that?
I do, and I think the essence of it is that we, in our founding, were different than any other country in the world before or since, is that people chose to come here to find liberty and to live their own lives without interference from others. And that has been a hallmark of America and the growth of the country. It has been done imperfectly from time to time, slavery being the most conspicuous example. And it is a dirty little secret of the United States. We're filled with human beings. That's why we make mistakes. But nonetheless, the aspirations have been unparalleled in world history, and the success of the country has been unparalleled in world history. That doesn't mean that other countries suffer as a comparison. It's simply saying we have a different heritage and different objectives, and that does distinguish us from everybody else. And the first person to use the word exceptional or exceptionalism to describe Americans was Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman in Democracy in America, because he could see it even back then.
So this country is about to embark in a very serious way towards electing a president. And before I ask you to give me an assessment, certainly the Republican candidates, as late as in August, you showed an interest in the nomination yourself. You wrote a piece in Human Events which you outlined some of the reasons for seeking the presidency, and this is the words with which you ended the article. To date, in my view, no Republican candidate, this is in August, has persuasively argued that our economic recovery and long-term prosperity are completely intertwined with a strong national security posture.
If no one else is prepared to make that case,